Hey there friends and enemies, JoPaWrites here again, and today I want to give my ranking of all the primary weapons currently in Helldivers 2, as the cutting edge warbond has been out for some time now, so we've really gotten a feel for how all these weapons are performing, and there's a couple things to keep in mind as I'm going through this tier list. First off, this is all subjective. If you have a favorite and I rank it low, don't get mad, let me know in the comments, but understand that everyone has their own preferences. I am ranking these based on how well I think they perform personally, how much fun they are, as well as how useful they are across a variety of different missions, because I do think some of the weapons specialize a little bit more depending on your playstyle. So because of that, some of these might be higher or lower than you might expect. First off, we're going to go through the ARs, starting off with the Liberator. This one is a fine starting weapon, and one that you will probably never use after you have it on for a bit early on in the game. And the reason for that, it quickly gets overshadowed. It feels like it does almost no damage once you get to higher difficulties and you start really facing off against heavier enemies, and so for that reason it's going to be a C tier alongside the Liberator Explosive. This is one that I wish was better, and I hope in general in the future we either get an AR that's really good or we get a buff to certain ARs, because this is just not one that I just see a lot of people using. It's not one that I use all that often because it just feels a bit underwhelming, and for that reason it's going to go a little bit lower. Then we're going to have the Penetrator. I wanted to put this in B tier, and I think it might be at the bottom edge of B, maybe high C, but it's better than the other ARs. I'm going to put it in B tier and just throw the ARs a little bit of a lifeline, just because it's not terrible. It can get the job done depending on what you're doing. I just feel like there's so many better options, even in B tier, that you're probably not going to be using that one very often. And that brings me to the marksman rifles. These ones are both solid in my opinion, and I would put the Diligence and the Diligence Counter Sniper both in B tier. And the reason that I can't put them any higher personally, I feel like they require a certain playstyle that I very much do not enjoy in Helldivers 2. If you're a support player who wants to hang back, I feel like you can definitely find some use out of these, but I am often in the chaotic mix, and so for that reason they just don't feel like a lot of fun to use compared to other better options, especially considering some of the shotguns have insane range and there are just better options for a long range taking out enemies. You'll see people using the railgun, even the laser cannon as stratagems you can call in to take out enemies at long range, and so I just overall feel like it's not a couple weapons that I would ever use all that often, and so for that reason that's why they're going to be in B tier. They're not terrible. I think they're definitely usable, and if you enjoy that playstyle they'll probably jump up to an A tier, but for me they're just not as much fun. Then we get to SMGs, and I really loved using the Defender early, but it's another one that quickly gets overshadowed by better options, so that's going to go right into the C tier. Again, just like ARs, I wish we had better options for SMGs, and hopefully we get some in the future, because right now they're just not that great. Whereas the Knight, I'm going to slide it into B tier for the same reason that I put the Penetrator. It's the best SMG. If you want to use SMGs and you like SMGs, it is fine, and I think it is usable, but it's just not going to be as good as some other options, and that's why I can't put it any higher. If I was going to rank these overall as far as strength, these two would be a lot lower than the two Diligence marksman rifles. However, I still think that they firmly fall into the B tier. So that's just something to keep in mind in my own personal preference. Now we're going to get into the shotguns, and this is where you're going to see the power level of these weapons, the strength of them, really start to kick up quite a bit. First off, we're going to have the Punisher, which I think is a solid weapon. I think it's fine overall. I think it's a solid B tier option, and it's going to be better than either of the SMGs or the ARs overall. I think it's pretty good, and it's definitely one that's risen in usage after the nerf to the Breaker. However, I still think it falls behind just a little bit compared to the other better option. Now we're going to have the Slugger. For whatever reason, I don't like this one at all. And so I'm going to put this in the C tier. And this is one where I'll probably get a lot of disagreement. But for me personally, it's just not that good. And I just don't enjoy it. I just don't enjoy the playstyle with it. And it feels very clunky. And so maybe people disagree with me, and that's fine. But that's just one that I'm going to rank a little bit lower. Now we're going to get the plasma shotgun, and I'm putting that one into A tier. And that's going to surprise people, I believe, overall, just because I know it's not the strongest, but having a shotgun like a grenade launcher is awesome to me. It is so much fun to use, and it has a lot of versatility once you understand how to use it. I think a lot of things that I've seen from this one is just people not using it correctly, and so that's why that falls down in their rankings. But overall, I think it's pretty solid. And so then we get into the breaker, and I think the breaker is still S tier. I know it was nerfed, but for me, it still outperforms pretty much every other shotgun in the game, and it is very, very good still overall. Again, depending on playstyle, there's certain people that I've seen would put currently the slugger ahead of the breaker. That's just not for me. It just doesn't fit what I'm trying to do. And every time I use it, every time I see people use it, it feels like more of a struggle than with the breaker, which still feels absolutely insane. Now, the incendiary is going to go in B tier. I've seen some folks say this is terrible, and I've seen some other people say it's godly. The reason I can't put it any higher personally is we don't have an armor set that reduces fire damage. If we did, I think this will jump up to A tier. But right now, the chance of you setting yourself or your teammates on fire is just way too high with this weapon currently, and that's why it's going to drop down a little bit for me. It can clear out odds pretty crazy, but overall, it's just not good enough, in my opinion, to make up for the fact that friendly fire damage is insane with it right now. Plus, it's just not as good as some other options, even with the performance of the incendiary part of it. Then we get to the breaker spray and pray. This one was tough for me because I wanted to love this weapon. I felt like it had a lot of potential, but I'm putting it in C tier. It's not terrible. It's just worse in every way than the base breaker. And so for that reason, I'm going to put it down quite a bit. It feels like you're shooting a marshmallow gun at anything that has any kind of armor. So because of that, it just feels not great to use, in my opinion, especially at higher difficulty levels. Now we're going to get to one that I hope is actually bugged because of how bad it is. The Arc 12 Blitzer. This one feels terrible, in my opinion. It is a worse version of the arc thrower, and that's to be expected. It's a primary weapon, but the arc thrower needed a nerf to be where it's at, whereas this feels like it's worse than the pre-nerf arc thrower. And it's just a real bummer because this, in theory, was a really cool weapon. Was a weapon that I really thought had a lot of potential, but overall just is not as good as I wish it was. And that's just such a bummer for me personally, because I like unique feeling weapons, and I wish all of them were competitive and were usable at higher levels. That's just one that I don't think that it is, and so that's why it's going to drop down quite a bit overall. And yeah, it's just a bit of a bummer for me personally. Now we're going to get to the Las 5 Scythe. This is the first laser weapon, and this is their second D tier. This is probably the worst gun in the game for me personally. Yes, the Arc Blitzer is not all that great, but I still feel like the Scythe is worse. And it's just, again, one of those where you unlock it, you use it for a bit, and you're like, why does this feel so bad? It's just not a weapon that I see used all that often, and for good reason. It's one of the worst weapons in the game, possibly the worst in my personal opinion, and yeah, it's just a major bummer because I just wish it was better. So yeah, I won't waste too much time on that. But then we get to its cousin, the Las 16 Sickle, and this one's actually A tier. This is my favorite non-shotgun in the game, personally. I think this one is fantastic. It is so much fun. It might not be the strongest in every scenario, but I do think it's usable in a lot of different situations. And it is one of the weapons that I would highly recommend getting the Cutting Edge Warbond just to unlock this. It's on page 1, very easy to snag, and I think it's definitely worthwhile if you have the super credits to get that Warbond. I think it's phenomenal. Now we're going to get to the Scorcher, and this one is controversial. It's the last option in the base Warbond, the free one, and I see a lot of people underrating this because of how hard it is to get. I'm going to put it in A tier. I think it's not S just because it is such a pain to get. Is it worth it? Maybe not with some of the better options. I think it's very good. And power level alone is borderline S tier. And I think it could really be one that we see a rise in use as more people unlock it. But it is such a grind to get there that I just don't see a lot of people, unless they're maxing out every Warbond, getting this one right away. So that's one that I think because of that, it is a drawback. But I think it's a unique weapon. It feels fun. It is very good at a lot of different things. And for that reason, I think it is worth getting eventually. But again, it's such a hassle that I think people underrate it a little bit, but it's still not going to be S tier for me because of that. And then finally, the Jar 5 Dominator. This is going to be the biggest surprise on the list for a lot of people. Just because I think people don't understand this weapon, I think it's an S tier. I think it's very good. I don't know if it got a sneaky buff. I had used it originally, and it felt underwhelming. But recently, I've been trying it out more, and it feels fantastic in a lot of different ways. So it is a unique weapon because it is the only option in its slot as far as when you're looking at types of primary weapons. And so I find that to be pretty fascinating. And overall, I think it's very, very good. I think it's one that a lot of people are sleeping on. Yeah, it's not best case in every single situation, but I think competitive-wise, it does a lot of things very, very well. And overall, it's one of the best weapons that I've used in the game so far. Let me know what you guys think of my tier list. I know I'm going to hear it from people. Every time I do a tier list, everyone's like, well, this tier list is terrible. This tier list is fantastic. And everything in between. That's just the territory that we are in when I'm doing these rankings, just because I know everyone has strong opinions. But let me know what you guys would change in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more tier lists and Helldivers 2 content from me going forward, definitely subscribe to the channel. It helps me out tremendously. And my name is JoPa. Have a good one. I'll catch you all later.